So welcome everyone. If you haven't already, please do introduce yourself to all of the friendly people here. Share your name, your pronouns, your faith and spiritual community if you are associated with one, and where you hail from, your city or state. We're so glad that you're here. Welcome to the October Community Connector webinar. Just delightful that you are here. This is a robust conversation that we're going to have to talk about loss and damage, and we're delighted to have some guests from a variety of organizations that you'll get to meet as we go along the way. But I want to get us started by offering a land acknowledgement, and we do have the words on the screen, but you are also welcome to either close your eyes or lower your gaze. Settle into your chair and maybe take a couple of cleansing breaths in. Steady ourselves and take a few moments to acknowledge the land that we here at Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light at our Twin Cities base of operations are on, and across the lands of Minnesota. Wherever you may be, wherever you are, let us acknowledge that we are all on Indigenous land. The state of Minnesota is located on the traditional and contemporary homelands of the Anishinaabe and Dakota peoples, the original stewards of this territory. We also acknowledge the trauma that is deeply embedded in the foundation of this country. The land we reside on came under control of the USA through genocide, slavery, and ongoing occupation. We recognize the deep historical, spiritual, and personal trauma that has impacted Indigenous communities, communities of color, and immigrant communities. By offering this acknowledgement of trauma, we affirm the right of people to bring their whole selves and stories into this space, and we affirm our intention to promote healing, respect, and love. So my name is the Reverend Terry Bernor. I am on staff at Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light, part of the Movement Builder team. This is the agenda that we have for this evening. I will share some welcoming words. And of course, we just spent a few moments of grounding with our land acknowledgement. And then we have a series of guest speakers and conversations with Analia Schleger dos Santos, Brandon Wu, Susanna Tuttle, and we'll hopefully have some time to share some efforts that MNIPL is doing in supporting Ruhel Islam with some frontline work in Bangladesh. And of course, ending with some next steps and how you can organize in your community. So this is a little bit of the lay of the land for what we will be doing tonight for this evening. What I'd like to share is this webinar is part of our Community Connector program. Community Connectors are ways that we grow the multi-faith climate justice movement in Minnesota. And at its very core, its whole premise is empowering others to empower others. It's a way where we can grow the snowflake and maximize the impact that we have in our organizing work together. Being a community connector is something that can be as simple or as expansive as you have the time or energy for, and as your community might need. And so we invite you to learn more about being a community connector and to commit or recommit as a community connector by going to this link. And we'll share this in the chat. And we'll share all of the links that are offered today will be shared in the chat, as well as in a follow-up email that will go out to everyone tomorrow. So if you would like to learn more, please go ahead and click those links and learn how you can become a community connector. And what happens is we'll send you a welcome email, and we'll give you the option to have a 30-minute phone call where we can go over what is going on at your community and how we might be able to help, or some programs or workshops or opportunities that might be of interest to what your climate justice teams or green teams might be working on. We, of course, offer this monthly Community Connector webinar, which is open to all people. We send a monthly Spark email just to the community connectors, which has an action alert that you can share with your community. And one of those will be going out tomorrow. And then as needed, there is plenty of support and coaching from any of our MNIPL staff or our movement builder volunteers, so that if you have an action plan that you're putting together or some sort of program coming up and you want some extra help, or you want some leadership development coaching on how to energize your climate team, those are the types of resources that we make available. All right. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Analia, who's going to kick off our feature topic for the evening, which is the loss and damage campaign. Analia.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Terry. Hey, everyone. My name is Analia Schleger dos Santos. I use she, her, and hers pronouns. I'm the Environmental Justice Youth Program Director with Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light. I run a youth program called Youth Empower. I've got actually some of our Youth Empower apprentices in the meeting here. So I'm so glad to see everyone's lovely faces. And I'm really excited to be talking with you all about this exciting thing I've been working on. Exciting for me to be working on it, but really serious happening that's occurring in the world right now. But first and foremost, what I would love for everyone to do is we're going to do a quick exercise. So I'm going to ask everyone to take out something to write on, or to, if you take notes on your computer, if you want to use your phone, whatever is clever. So I'll give everyone just a second to do that. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to write really quick about what home feels like to you. Pretty simple question, complex slew of answers. So we'll write it in the chat so that everyone knows the question. What does home feel like to you? I'd love to know what it looks like, what it feels like. How do you know when you're at home? How do you know you're at home? How do you know you're in community, which is a separate question, but what does home feel like to you? We'll give everyone, we'll say 2 minutes to write. And once you do write it down, feel free to share in the chat.
Analia, would it be okay if some of these were read so that those watching the recording might be able to hear what has been shared? Would that be okay?
Yep. I was just about to say, thanks folks for starting to share in the chat. So some of the things I'm seeing are loving, comfortable, safe, feeling loved and accepted, loving, warm, respected, comfortable, comfy, cozy, peaceful, restful, a place that holds memories. I love that. Safe, I'm seeing safe in a lot of folks' responses. Serene, love-filled, at peace, a place of laughter, Smells like food cooking. Okay. Oh, my favorite that I've seen so far, thank you, Marcia, is basic needs met. That's actually going to lead us into what we're going to talk about tonight. Yes, chickens in the garden, coffee on the porch, changing seasons. Thanks for sharing, folks. So at MNIPL, we do our best to encourage folks to find their own place in this story and in this movement. So for me, what home feels like is everything that everyone's been saying in the chat for sure. I grew up in North Minneapolis, Minnesota. I grew up playing sports. I grew up playing outside. I grew up going camping, being tortured by my little brothers. I don't know if anyone can relate to that, but I remember, like Julia said, seasons changing. That's Minnesota for you. That's what home feels like to me. What I want my home to look like, I want it to be safe. I want it to feel like sanctuary. I want it to be somewhere that I feel proud of, somewhere that I want to come back to. I'm sure everyone feels the same. I want to, sorry to interrupt my own self. I see a Kim K in here. Is that Kim Kardashian? Sorry. Yeah, I want my home to feel like a sanctuary. I want it to be somewhere that I can come back to, and that I can, you know, have this sentiment of feeling cozy and feeling cared for. So what we're going to talk about today, and the reason why I asked everyone to reflect on what home feels like to you, is we're going to talk about, not to get negative, but to get serious, we're going to talk about folks globally that are losing their homes, their homelands, everything they've ever known because of the climate crisis. So I just want that to marinate with everyone for a second. We are going to talk about what people are experiencing globally, and how that's going to reflect the way that we live our life here and vice versa. So if you want to go to the slide, Terry, if you will. So this is myself and Ruhel Islam, who we're going to hear a bit more about later on, community member and beloved friend. We are here in Glasgow in this photo at the climate strike at COP26. So the first time that I heard focused on, I'd say professionally, on our global responsibility was in Glasgow at COP26. That was the first time that I had been in a space where we're discussing the way things are at present globally. My organizing background has focused on Minneapolis, North Minneapolis, and our marginalized communities, the one that I come from here at home, but I had not heard about what loss and damage was until I was in Scotland. So there was little to none, sorry, my neighbor's getting home. There was little to no mention of human rights and loss and damage in Glasgow. There was little to none, I will say. I was not hearing much about human rights. I know that the conversations were happening. I know that this is something that, you know, people are talking about every day. And I also know that there's a lot of fights happening at present to preserve people's homes that are being destroyed. So essentially what loss and damage is, everyone, is we're talking about reparations. We have a different framework for the term reparations here in the US. But essentially the way a college student put it is we are paying people for, not we as individuals, but we are paying people for harms that have been caused. So when we're talking about global climate policy and global climate crisis and the way that that is affecting different communities, loss and damage directly relates to paying countries in the global south, so countries that are some label developing countries. It is paying these countries to start to right some of the wrongs and the damage and the loss that they have experienced as a result of the climate crisis. So the United States is one of the historically largest emitters of greenhouse gases historically. So the rest of the world that is experiencing the worst effects of the climate crisis, they're the ones that are contributing the least to the climate crisis. So the United States also has posited itself as one of the biggest blockers of progress, which is the same with the European Union. Although we hold our fair share of contributions to the climate crisis. So at COP26, at these global climate conferences, and in most conversations around how we solve or how we address the climate crisis as we're experiencing it, most people focus, and the conversation tends to focus on adaptation and mitigation. So adaptation refers to adjustments in ecological, social, economic systems as a response to actual or expected climatic stimuli and their effects or impacts. So often we talk about how communities, how individuals can adapt. How can I as one person do less, use less to have less of a lasting impact on the environment? And mitigation, is the sort of looking at the same thing. So you can go to the next slide. So essentially, like I had said, loss and damage occurs when, due to either slow onset or sudden events related to climate change, something is irreversibly lost and cannot be repaired or replaced, or something has been broken and requires a financial investment to be repaired. This includes both financial and non-financial losses. So when I do this presentation to college students, I tend to have them read each of these individually so that we can start to sit with what loss and damage constitutes as. But I'll just kind of run through these. So it essentially, loss and damage, things that count as loss of life due to hurricane, flood, or famine driven by drought, loss of income due to crops being destroyed, loss of land because of rising sea levels or desertification, loss of culture due to widespread climate displacement of communities. Loss of culture is one that really can't be measured. Roads, homes, and other infrastructure, loss of livelihoods, displacement and loss of homes due to land erosion or mudslides, Indigenous communities' loss of sacred land due to climate change. As we know, Indigenous communities globally have been protecting and nourishing environment for hundreds and hundreds, thousands of years. So the reason that is in this list is because as Indigenous communities lose sacred land, we have less people that have been traditionally and continue to protect land globally, as well as loss of farmland. So can anyone tell me, and feel free to come off mute, can anyone point to which of these tend to be more of a financial loss?
I'm just going to say that we can replace income, for example, obviously, because replacing money is replacing money. We can probably replace roads, and we might be able to replace homes, but we probably can't replace culture, and we certainly can't replace someone's life.
Right. So when I was giving this presentation to some St. Thomas students, and I asked what the difference was between adaptation and loss and damage. Essentially, what we're talking about is how do we repair financially spaces and people that have been harmed beyond adaptation. So somebody in this college class said, well, you can't adapt when you're dead. Adapt when you're dead. You cannot adapt when you're dead. So if we have given them options to adapt We have told folks to mitigate, and that just doesn't do it. How do we start to compensate for that? So that is what essentially loss and damage focuses on. But it's really hard to pay for, loss of culture and loss of sacred land and loss of life. So this is the beginning of starting to address that. Since I got lost, you can go to the next slide. Since I got involved in this campaign, I got to spend the weekend with a young woman named Vanessa Nakate 2 weeks ago, who is a young climate activist from Uganda, who has been doing phenomenal work in her country to address the climate crisis and to get solar stoves in schools, focusing on women and girls. And she is a huge advocate for loss and damage. So I've been able to meet, since going to COP, some really amazing young folks that are working really hard, like a young woman in Indonesia who is reforesting her village, some young indigenous folks from Ecuador who are working hard to protect the river that their community gets its water from, and other sorts of stories. But essentially, there are folks all over the world that are working extremely hard to save themselves and their lives, and to start to hopefully ensure a future for themselves. So I'm gonna turn it over to keep us moving, and get off my soapbox and pass it over to Brandon Wu with ActionAid, and we're gonna talk about next steps.
Great, thank you, Anelia. Hi, everyone. My name is Brandon Wu. I am the Director of Policy and Campaigns at ActionAid USA, based in Washington, D.C. ActionAid is a international development organization and human rights organization. We have offices in or presence in about 45, 50 countries around the world. And we started working on climate change almost 20 years ago now, from the perspective of how is it affecting people, real people in the global South. So we were working with smallholder farmers who were starting to say things like, the rainfall patterns are changing, we don't know when to plant anymore. They, of course, weren't using the language of climate change, but we were able to connect the dots and say, this is an issue that we need to start working on. This is an issue that's affecting people now. It's not a crisis of the future. And this was 20 years ago. And of course, things have gotten much more intensified now. So I'm going to talk a little bit about loss and damage in the international negotiations process, the UN climate talks. Anelia referred to it already, talking about COP26. Those were the big climate negotiations last year in Glasgow. Those negotiations happen every year and have been happening every year for almost 3 decades at this point. And it was fairly recently that the UN climate talks adopted loss and damage as a third pillar of negotiations next to mitigation and adaptation. So it's now an official part of the negotiations. And just to recap, mitigation is reducing the greenhouse gas emissions that drive climate change from, for example, the energy, transport, and agriculture sectors. Adaptation is coping with climate impacts, like farmers responding to changes in rainfall patterns or increasing soil salinity, or things like providing early warning systems and storm shelter infrastructure to vulnerable communities. And then loss and damage, on the other hand, as you heard from Anelia, I think really, really powerfully is supporting communities to cope with impacts that are so severe they can't be adapted to. So the classic example is sea level rise, literally wiping out small island states, or disasters destroying entire cities. These are not things that can be adapted to. So the question that people often ask is, well, what is the scale that we're talking about? How much, if we're asking for money to support developing countries to cope with loss and damage, what is the scale that we're talking about? There aren't that many studies because this is really hard stuff to estimate. There was a 2018 paper that estimated the economic costs of loss and damage in the global South could be on the scale of $500 billion in 2030 and could reach $1 to $2 trillion by 2050. Of course, this doesn't take into account non-economic losses, which Analia already talked about: loss of land, loss of culture, loss of biodiversity, etc. Just as one example of this, you all heard about the floods in Pakistan very recently. The economic damages that have been estimated for that are approaching $30 billion now, and this is just from a single disaster. And then if you look at the non-economic piece of it, 33 million people have been displaced, have lost their homes, and have been forced to migrate, for the most part internally within the country. To put that in perspective, that's almost 6 times the population of Minnesota, right? From one disaster. So this is the scale that we're talking about. And so what are we doing about it? So as I mentioned, we have this negotiating track at the UN climate talks on loss and damage. Interestingly, loss and damage was first raised in those negotiations by Vanuatu, a small Pacific island country, in 1991. So this is more than 30 years ago. They raised this, and it was pretty much ignored. And then finally, through a lot of negotiating from developing countries and a lot of support from civil society organizations like my own, and many others that IPL is affiliated with, we got an agreement in 2013 for an international mechanism to address loss and damage. And then that was enshrined in the Paris Agreement, which hopefully you've all heard about, in 2015. So the big climate agreement that every country in the world pretty much signed on to. Loss and damage was officially part of the Paris Agreement, but with some qualifying language put in by the United States that it wouldn't provide any basis for compensation. So this is the big fight, right? How do we get actual resources to flow to the countries that need those resources to cope with loss and damage? The negotiations have been ongoing. In 2019, they established something called the Santiago Network, which is basically like a technical support facility. So helping countries think about frameworks and infrastructures they might need to deal with loss and damage. And then last year in COP26 in Glasgow, almost every country in the world agreed that we needed a loss and damage finance facility to actually facilitate the flow of resources from the global north to the global south for loss and damage. But the US blocked it. And the US, of course, is extremely powerful. And so instead of a loss and damage finance facility, what we got was a tiny little bit of money to operationalize the Santiago Network, which had previously basically just existed as a website with no resources. Now the Santiago Network has a staff, and it can, actually do a little bit of technical support to countries, but there's still no money to implement the recommendations that are given to countries on loss and damage. So this is the big fight right now. So we're now organizing around a renewed push for a loss and damage finance facility. It's really clear that we need a mechanism for this that's separate from money for mitigation and money for adaptation, because we're dealing with very different problems here. The US is saying, we don't really need this. We already have a humanitarian aid network or framework. But again, this is something that's very different from humanitarian aid. Humanitarian aid is very much ad hoc. It doesn't build resilience in an ongoing way. Pakistan had massive floods in 2010. Billions of dollars flowed to Pakistan in the form of ad hoc humanitarian aid. No resilience was built. And they're back in the same position now, 12 years later. So we need something that actually responds to the climate crisis rather than being purely ad hoc charity, and something that we think about in the context of a climate debt or climate reparations, right? Where there's clearly responsibility on countries like the United States who have caused this problem. This is not charity we're talking about. This is a moral obligation. So before I close out, I want to just highlight really that the United States government has been a primary blocker of progress on loss and damage in the international negotiations, and this has been true from the beginning. So I mentioned in the Paris Agreement, there was language saying that loss and damage could provide no basis for compensation. That was the United States at work. There were many things that were very difficult in negotiating that agreement that every country signed up to. It was loss and damage that made the negotiations run until the 11th hour on the last day, because the US was holding out saying, we cannot accept language about loss and damage if there's any chance that it implies that we have a financial obligation. That was the US red line. It almost destroyed the entire negotiating process until finally they got what they wanted. And now, in Glasgow, I mentioned the US was one of the primary and really one of the only major blockers behind the finance facility. And so this is stuff that's happening, by the way, under Democratic administrations, right? The Paris Agreement was negotiated under Obama. The US blocking loss and damage in Glasgow was under Biden, right? Which is not to say that the Trump administration was any better. They certainly weren't. But just to say that this has been a consistent stance of the United States, regardless of administration. And so this is a big problem. Because if the US isn't on board, the climate crisis is global. The US is one of the wealthiest countries in the world. We have to do our fair share if we want to solve this crisis. And so we need a lot more pressure on the US government to do the right thing. They need to hear from people like you on this call directly that what they're doing at the global negotiations is really just not okay. So I'm going to stop there. Julia, do we have time for quick questions, or should we keep it rolling?
I think we have time for a question or two.
Okay, if there are any, feel free to type it in the chat. Or
We will also, if you want to be typing questions in the chat, Brandon, I don't know if you can just keep your eye on the chat. We're hoping to end, 5 or 10 minutes before the official end time of 8:15, so that we can really have an audience conversation. So if there's one question now, we can do that, and then there'll be more time for questions, hopefully at the end.
Okay. And I'm going to drop a link into the chat, which is a paper from Climate Action Network International, which is an umbrella network of something like 1,500 organizations from 130 countries that makes the case for the need for a loss and damage finance facility. Highly recommend that. Yes, thank you, Patricia, for your comment in the chat. This book, Storming the Wall by Todd Miller, really making the link between climate change, climate-induced displacement, and border militarization. This is actually a really big issue that we're not talking about right now at the UN negotiations because we're so focused on the finance issue. But climate-induced migration and this vicious cycle that you can see happening in Europe already, where there's climate inaction, which drives migration, which drives a rise in far-right sort of ethno-nationalist politics, kind of a neo-fascism. It's like this vicious circle. And it's something that we really have to figure out how to break. And we're starting to do that work with some migrant justice work organizations here in the US, but it's a really big non-economic issue.
Great. Brandon, do you want to introduce Liddy, even though she's not here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I should say, I think Minnesota Interfaith Power and Light recently joined a global network called the Global Campaign to Demand Climate Justice. So this was founded just about 10 years ago as a union of grassroots organizations in the global South with NGOs in the global North, as well as grassroots organizations in the global North, as a way to kind of coordinate global pressure on governments to act on climate change. One of the founding members of DCJ, as we call it, Demand Climate Justice, is Liddy MNIPL, who is a longtime Filipina activist, just an amazingly powerful person who got her activism roots in fighting the Marcos dictatorship in the Philippines, has experienced some pretty severe personal losses in some of those struggles, and for the last 10, 15 years has been really putting everything into fights around climate justice and debt justice. And she runs an organization called the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development. She's actually here in Washington, D.C. This week because of the International Monetary Fund meetings and some meetings that we're facilitating between her and members of Congress. But unfortunately, she's sick. So she was going to join us tonight, but she isn't able to. But she sent along a sort of 1.5-minute video that unfortunately isn't the kind of personal story that we wanted to hear from someone like her, but it does give a good overview of the issue of loss and damage from the perspective of an organization based in the Global South.
So Terry, you're loading this up, I assume, just taking a second.
Sorry about that. Apparently the share hasn't started, so hold on one sec. Let me try that again.
And if it doesn't work, we can also just share the link directly.
Ruhel is on. You know what? Let's skip this, you guys, because Ruhel has joined us from Bangladesh and he'll be able to spend a little time
Great.
After Susanna. We'll put the link in the chat for the video that Liddy sent. And so I'd like to introduce my good friend, Susanna Tuttle. Susanna has been teaching me a lot about the incredible need to be engaged in the international conversation about fair shares and loss and damage. And Susanna, before we hear a little bit from Rahel and his village in Bangladesh, tell us why we need to have faith actors and youth and folks who are engaged in fossil fuel fights, engaged in this issue of loss and damage.
Sure. Well, thank you, everyone, and Julia and Analia. I got to meet Analia just last weekend when she was here in the Carolinas, when Vanessa Nakate was here from Uganda. And it was a life-changing experience, I must say. So I'm really grateful to be with all of you this evening. As Julia said, I've been the director of North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light since 2011. So I'm in my 11th year of doing this work to the south of all of you in Minnesota, and was able to travel up north last summer as part of a bus convoy to the Treaty Peoples Gathering at the headwaters of the Mississippi River in honor of the work that you are all doing so hard up in that region to protect Indigenous rights and understand our role as treaty people that signed those treaties with Indigenous peoples and our ancestry. So I also, in North Carolina, the Interfaith Power and Light campaign is part of the North Carolina Council of Churches, and I direct the Eco Justice Connection. And it really, this video that you aren't seeing, but would have played, what I was gonna say is that the message that's already been shared by Analia and the explanation that Brandon does so beautifully, that I've learned so much from over these years as part of working with the U.S. Climate Fair Share Collaborative, is I recognize over and over and over again that the unique role of people of faith is that we seek the truth and we speak the truth. And now is the time for truth telling. And Brandon laid it out very, very clearly that we are not doing what we need to do as a United States government. And it should be a government by the people, for the people. And I thought it was really also very telling when Analia in the beginning recognized that when we look at disasters and impacts and directly impacted communities, the language that we talk about, how we address recovery and resiliency is definitely economically based in many cases in the United States. But we fall back on these old structures, these failing institutions like insurance, as if, the most directly impacted hurt first and worse don't already have injustices that are taking place in their communities. And so by coming together in the spirit of international solidarity around what is being asked for by the global South to the North, and to the countries that have benefited off the extraction of goods and services and people and the soil. We're here as people of faith to make sure that those folks' voices are front and center. And so I'm really, really grateful to be able to attend COP27 in order to represent the various communities that I serve as a climate justice faith leader. In that spirit of international solidarity, and for all of you that have joined this evening and can pass on the information and the education around loss and damage, we need that to be ringing throughout the streets of our communities and rural spaces in the United States as the international discussions are taking place, because we recognize that there is a massive gap between the action that is needed and the action that the world's elites are willing to take on. And when I talk about the world's elites, I am literally talking about our president, our administration, people that we might find ourselves in agreement with on a lot of issues are not stepping up to the role that they need to be playing. And they know very well what they do. And I always remind, particularly elected officials that I advocate on issues around and for and through, is that they identify as people of faith themselves. We actually have a very strong, faithful leadership in the United States right now, that are willing to talk about their faith and be forefront with their faith. And so we have to be clear that as people of faith in our communities, that the answer isn't to compromise on what's needed, but to make it happen, to stop talking about what is possible and understand what is needed. And meeting the Paris Agreement goals are going to require global transformational action. We know that no country will do enough unless they believe everyone will be doing their part. And therefore, the US must do its fair share if there's to be any hope that the rest of the world is going to do theirs. I mean, that's just obvious. We know that from the playground growing up. This is not just morally and ethically the right thing. Realistically, it is the only way to make the needed global ambition happen. And I think what's so important for those of us working in faith communities or identify as people of conscience is that we have to understand that climate finance is a key part of US climate action. We can reduce our own emissions. We must do that. But we also have to invest in helping other countries around the world, as Brandon so eloquently explained, that we have to repent truly from the emissions that we have put out into the atmosphere at historic levels, beyond any other country. And also, we're the richest country in the history of the world. We have the resources if we would just allocate them towards what it needs to go to. And this is not charity. And the truth is that despite all the complexity and mixed cases, some countries are wealthy and some are not. And that wealthy ones also tend to have an outsized responsibility for climate change. We know that. We have to own up to that, literally and figuratively. And poor, low emitting countries deserve to have our support. International cooperation is the only way to resolve this mismatch. That's what we were talking about earlier. And I know that Julia is going to be talking about things that we can do to make sure that we address this. And I'll just close by saying that one of the reasons I would have been so drawn and have basically taken all of the work that I'm doing around ministry to address the issues around global equitable climate finance is because it often, and raise your hand or put a little star in the chat if you want to, if you find it to be very, very complicated, overwhelming, and long going to actually talk about money in your faith communities. And the reality is that faith communities have pledged over $57 trillion globally in the form of divestment, the divestment out of fossil fuels. But we are just now having those conversations about what reinvestment is. So if we're willing to show up as members of civil society, as people of faith that seek the truth and speak the truth, and really hold folks in places of power that have the ability to address the climate emergency for what it is. We know that this is a global movement for accountability and resource redistribution, and driven by civil society, which all of you are a part. We have partners leading on parallel work all over the world, as Brandon shared, and we're all part of the movement. So I'm going to hand it over to Julia. It sounds like Ruhel. I'm going to hand it over to you, or I'll hand it over to Julia.
Beautiful. Thank you, Susanna and Brandon and Analia, for really painting a picture of what we need to do. I'm so excited, Brother Ruhel, you're on, your power must be working, and you have a lot of things to share with us from what's happening in Bangladesh. Would you like me to sort of cue that up for you, and then you can say a few words? Terry, why don't you put those slides up, if you would? All right. What I'm going to do here is, in the next minute or two, I'm going to introduce Ruhel. He's going to tell us a little bit about what's happening in Bangladesh. But many of you all know Ruhel from the Line 3 movement, from Minnesota IPL, from the incredible Gandhi Mahal restaurant here in Minneapolis. Ruhel has returned to Bangladesh and has been leading some work to help rebuild a village that has been destroyed by floods that happened earlier this year. And so I've got a couple of, we didn't know if Ruhel was going to have power and be able to join us tonight, and he is here. So Ruhel, will you just tell us a little bit about what happened this year in Bangladesh, and what are you doing to address the issue? And you can talk for a couple of minutes. We also have, I have one video from when you first entered the village in June, and then some pictures of some of the rebuilding that's going on right now. But why don't you just tell us what is happening?
A few months ago, of course, flood happened here and destroyed 2 times actually. And first he destroyed the crops on the land, and second the flood destroyed the stockpile of the food and the houses. And yesterday, last couple of days, was heavy raining here. You know, some people supposed to get ready again for new crops again for harvest in our areas, which is very unusual. You know, rain don't happen this much this month. It's supposed to be dry down slowly, water go down, and our plan was to start rebuilding, but we already started rebuilding the supplies like bricks and stuff. You know, the people use the boats, small we call noka, you know, carry the bricks to next to those villages. You may see some on the picture I sent. And road and cement, we're building 10 houses over there, but somehow people are able to start to you know, making the long pillars, which is they will, you know, pile down to the ground and make a strong foundation for those houses. These are the quick update from me for now. And heavy rain, one of the main reason, and also people in this area suffering, you know, by nearing a border country. One of the women, which is, you know, everyone picked first to build her house. She's alone. Her during that time, her son was killed by the border guard, patrol guard. Then she has no one. So right now, people were able to found someone she can live with, as she's living by herself. So they collaborate this one, and we're able to build house together for them, one room for her and living with the family. So she's not going to be alone. She'll be with this family in that community. So this is, I think, great. I feel very good about that. You know, in this age, a woman living by herself in a, it's very depressing for her, but now she found a new family to live with. She don't have to live by herself. So this is one of the 10 house we'll be building. That's really wonderful. And in the future, I'll be able to send her picture probably. We'll try to, when next week probably, I'm trying to get to that village, and we'll show you more, the action work over there. I'll give it back to Julia. If you want to show some of the slides here. Oh, this is during the, sorry.
Go ahead. I'm going to show this, and then why don't you tell people what they're seeing? This is a video that Ruhel sent in June.
So this is, see people looking for help. It's like they're living in Ireland, looks like, but this is a flood affected
You can
area.
talk.
The village.
Oh,
I can talk.
well, maybe just wait for 1 minute, then it'll stop in just a second.
Julia, we're not hearing your sound, but we can hear Ruhel just fine if you want to talk, Ruhel.
Okay, so this is the village I visited like a whole day with the boats with our team from here, and how you see how people are waving. I mean, they're looking for help, and some of the houses you see with the tin still surviving. They're using, but this house, people living. Actually, not only people, there is snakes and other animals inside. Somehow, and some people died from the snake bites. This is a village which is water everywhere. It's like a lake everywhere. And now when you went there, looks like a big ocean, or like a water everywhere and big waves. And some of the high land, which is under the tree, people are living, some people living in the tree too. And we went to distribute the food and especially the water for them. There's a water everywhere, but people cannot drink water. I mean, they drink this water, they have diarrhea and cholera. So we were like very difficult to even distribute food, because how zombie attack look like. People are attacking, but it's not. They're so thirsty, they jump and they want to. So we were able to distribute them bottled water, even though it's a plastic bottled water, but there's no other options. But right now, some of the wells showing up and they're using it. Some people went there, distribute some tablets to purify the water. So that's helping. That was the picture, and some, in the month of June sometime.
Can you all hear me now? I think you can. The other little video I have right now is of the new houses that are being built. And I just wanted to say, maybe I won't show it because I don't know that it will translate very well, but I wanted to say that Ruhel has, MNIPL has been working with Ruhel to raise funds in order to rebuild these homes in the village. So it costs about $2,000 US to rebuild a home, and which is like pretty incredible. But this is because it's this whole community activity. So in the past couple of weeks, they've been delivering bricks and rebar and things like that to the village, and people have been starting to rebuild the home or the homes. At this point, we have funds for 10 homes. And again, this is just one way for us in Minnesota to sort of really be on the front lines with Ruhel in, the most present way that we can from very far away, and hearing the stories of people who are, not only impacted, but also are in need of help. Perfect. Thank you, Terry. So this is, you want to just say a couple words about these two pictures, Ruhel?
Yes, the first picture, we were distributing packaged food to people. That's written in Bangla, called Shirni, which is like a, Shirni called like when you distribute food to people in need. And second picture was people are delivering with the boats. I talked that the bricks on the just by the village. It's all still water everywhere. So that's the second picture story. And this is so nice, you know. Also, the bricks need to be soaked into the water. So actually, now they're doing both, uh, uh, soaking water, and they will use this village will come together and take out these bricks from this water to 10 different houses.
Beautiful. Terry, I think that maybe we're done with those slides. Is that true? Rahel, thank you so much for being on with us this morning, this evening. It's wonderful to see your face, and good luck. I know you're going to be traveling out there to the village in the next week or so. Is that right?
Yes.
So we'll hope that you'll send some pictures home, and we have a blog on the MNIPL site that you can read the continuing story of that work. Okay. So I'd like to, it's almost 8 now. I'd like to, as we always do at MNIPL, tell you what it is that you can do to engage with this work as we're moving forward. And I just want to say, we're so grateful to be able to participate in this project that's going on in Bangladesh. And we know that raising money to pay for one village to have some repair done is not, in fact, the full systemic work that we need to do. You all know we like to talk about a three-legged stool of action at MNIPL. We want to make sure that there's some practical things we're doing to understand and be real with the problem. There are things that we need to do at a systemic level so that we can create the solutions that can scale and be present for decades to come, that can build resilient systems. And we need to be in relationship with one another and with the people that are impacted. As many of you are, I am coming out of the line 3 fight feeling both very sad and a little bit depleted by the fact that there's a pipeline running oil through our soil. But I will always have been changed by the stories that I heard from people on the front lines and the very real work of taking action together. And this is a place where we are going to be investing our energy now as an organization, and we're inviting you into it. It's not the same as working, in our home state, but it is a part of being in solidarity globally with people across the world who are impacted in similar ways to the ways that people in northern Minnesota are impacted by line 3. And I say this only because, we talk a lot about the global north and the global south and how we are a wealthy nation and the US needs to step up to the plate and pay for loss and damages internationally. We also need to be thinking about loss and damage in the United States and at the front lines of the climate crisis here in Louisiana, West Virginia, northern Minnesota, places across the country. So we have a lot of important conversations we're going to be engaged in the coming years about reparation to descendants of slaves in the United States, about reparation for land that has been stolen, and about addressing loss and damage internationally. This is complicated work to be thinking about reparation in the context of all these different types of harm that have been done. And I just want to invite you all into that complicated and nuanced conversation in the years to come. I have thrown in the chat several different ways that we can be taking action together, and this is lots of things here. But the first invitation is that hopefully at the end of the month, we are going to have faith actors from across the country and youth climate actors from across the country meeting with the State Department to let them know that COP27 is not another year where they should back out of the conversation and block this essential action on loss and damage. And we're going to be very particular about asking for a finance facility. It's not a very sexy term in action language, but it is what needs to happen. It's what the Global South has asked for, and it's what we are working towards. The target that we need to influence is John Kerry and his delegation to the COP. And so we are hoping to meet with his staff in order to make it clear that across the country, faith institutions are waking up and that we are going to be paying attention to what they do in Egypt. So that's the first thing. Even if you're not able to meet with the State Department, if you would fill out this form, they have asked to see, are we for real? And even just the act of turning in a list with 100 people on it that says we want to meet with you as faith actors and youth actors is going to help us to get that meeting. So if you can click on that first link and sign up to meet with the State Department, that would be awesome. So that's number one. Number two is we need you to help spread the word about this petition. I have shared a link to the petition that is going out across the country for faith actors and youth to sign in order to ask the State Department to get us a finance facility. That is the same language, the same petition as you will find on the Minnesota IPL website. We are going to combine those names into one national movement to get folks to raise their voice. So if you're in a state that's other than Minnesota, this is your link. If you're in Minnesota, go to the last link where you will find the Minnesota petition on the Minnesota IPL website. So those are the sort of two things we're asking you to do tonight. We would love to come to your faith community, to your school, to your classroom, to your community group and do a presentation about loss and damage, ask people to think about their homes, get them to learn the stories of people around the world. If you bring enough people, I bet we could convince Brandon or Susanna or Liddy or others to come and join us. But we'd love to be able to do this presentation for others. And so if you can sign up to help us host more conversations and get more people to know what the term loss and damage means, that would be amazing. So that's what we're asking for tonight. And we would love you to be empowered to empower others. So if you know of 5 people that you could send the link to this petition and out to, take some notes on your paper. I know you have it right next to what your home is like. Who are the 5 people that you're going to be able to tell the story of loss and damage to, and send them to these links so that they can get engaged? That's your assignment. Think of the 5 people that you can do this. If you're a community connector from a faith community, you can put this in your bulletin and get maybe 100 people to sign the petition. But we have a goal by the end of October. We like to have 1,000 signatures on this petition in Minnesota, and then many more across the nation, so that we can bring those to John Kerry and his folks. All right. That is about all I've got tonight for our loss and damage webinar. And so now it's time for you all to ask questions of anybody who's on here. Share with us what you need to share. We're opening up the chat, and then willing to take your questions or your comments.
And as you think,
yes.
As you think of your questions, I just want to share a friendly reminder that we put a lot of information in the chat, a lot of links, a lot of resources. This will all be put in a follow-up email. It'll also be included in the GDoc that will be associated with the recording that will be put on our YouTube channel. So it'll be really easy for you to share what you learned and come back and look up that thing that you remember hearing and want to reference again. So do rest assured that that will all be available to you, and hopefully a really easy to reference resource.
Thanks so much. Quito, I just want to say hello out there. I know you're going to Egypt.
Yes, with Analia. Woo. And a whole bunch of people from across the Americas that are all going to be talking about loss and damages. So this is really, really helpful. Thank you.
Well, we're counting on you to bring those stories back. Share them back with us. That would be amazing. Any questions for Brandon, Susanna, Nalia? Ruhel, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you, Rahel, for joining us so early in the morning. I know it's like 7 a.m. barely.
All right, I have a question for you, Brandon.
It looks like Eric raised his hands.
Eric, yes, please, take it away.
Yeah, hi. Thanks so much for the presentation. I just had a brief question. I wondered if anyone has a recommended short pitch for how we might bring this to a faith community that might be, I don't know, not super, like that might have members that are not super engaged with such issues. If we wanted to maybe invite MNIPL to give a presentation.
So Eric, I will answer that question briefly and then thoughts from others welcome. First of all, I think that one of the reasons that it's exciting to get faith communities and faith leaders involved is there's a lot of faith communities that already have a relationship with places that are being impacted by loss and damage. So, you know, my Episcopal church has a relationship with a village called Bonneville in Haiti. And members of our congregation have visited there, and you know, they're every year have more loss and less progress. And so we already think about it. And I think that this gives people a framework for thinking about the kinds of systemic change that needs to happen in order to get the you know, large scale resources available to really address this problem. So I think that if you can connect it with an existing effort that a faith community is doing. There's a whole group in northern Minnesota, Lutherans, who have a project that they've helped to produce solar PV for Phoebe. Anyway, you know, what's happening in the countries where we've already been active. So that'd be the first question. And then we would love to come in and simply do a presentation. We'll do it on Zoom, we'll do it in person, wherever you want us to be. We will meet you there. Susanna, what's your elevator pitch? Your 30-second.
I just think it's so important to remind folks that, like, whatever we're doing in the United States to address the climate change issue, it doesn't matter what we're doing if we don't do it internationally. And so, like, no country, however rich and powerful it is, can stabilize its climate system because there's no such thing as a country's climate system. So, you know, the way in which we're able to talk about doing our fair share, I think is something, again, that breaks it down to a foundational value system versus all the complexities of trying to say, oh, now you members of my congregation need to become climate experts and understand loss and damage, you know, financial mechanisms, and you need to know what COP is, and you need to know, you know, all of these different things. And, oh, yes, you don't even think the United Nations is a real thing and whatever. Not trying to convince anybody of anything that they're already not passionate about, but to just like lay it down as truth that this is it. This is do or die from a literal perspective. And then what is unique again about faith communities is if they want to get into the belief systems about what is happening right now. And I feel like I could go off on a total tangent with regards to some of the things that are being said globally about what's happening on the planet, you know, both politically and socially, and, you know, from a nationalistic perspective. But we should be able to have those real conversations within our communities of faith, and just to do our fair share. If someone says, I don't think we should do our fair share, well, then let's have that conversation. You know, why not? Or do you know what our fair share is? Or, you know, start in those places. And again, I keep coming back to the money piece is like, I think, and I'll say this very clearly, and I know we're about to end, but I believe it is a failure of people of faith that we are in this climate mess to begin with. And part of it is because we don't actually have the conversations that we need to be having. And as my executive director says, like, Jesus wasn't crucified because he prayed too much. And he was turning the tables of money. And what we're talking about is climate finance that is equitable, just, righteous. It is the reason, hopefully, that many of us wake up every day as people of faith to do the right thing. And so, yeah, Julia, go for it.
I want to just
In the
say,
South, I have to go deep with it on all that stuff. But we have
love
the
it.
power. That's the power and light within us, and our relationship to power and light, right?
I want to say there's a great comment from Tim in the chat, and I want to say one of the reasons that I'm excited about this effort is that it's actually the innovation and the practical, real projects all over the world that are going to get us to where we need to go. Again, we'll send you out the blog for Rahel's story. What we're following is people in that village already know how to build houses, right? We are helping them get the materials that they need. We're not coming in with huge designs that are like, from somewhere else. They're figuring out how to get this done. What they need is to have control over the funds that are going to make it possible for their resilience to be born into reality. And so this isn't about charity, it's about giving democratic decision-making capacity for those in nations that need it, so that they can figure out what they need to do. And that's how we're going to get there. One project, one set of people at a time. There's a wonderful quotation from Thomas Friedman. He says, 1 million Noahs, 1 million arks. Maybe it's even more than 1 million Noahs and million arcs that we're going to need, but the systemic structures of making it possible for that to happen rely on some international responsibility around finance. Okay, we are at 8:15, and Brandon, I'll let you take it away and just close it up. You're the last speaker.
Okay, no pressure. I actually just wanted to respond to the same comments, and Julia, you did it beautifully. And I just wanted to add a perspective from the global South. So it's really easy, I think, to be cynical about the UN climate negotiations, about these endless talks where, yeah, we've been doing them for 3 decades and emissions are still going up, right? And so what are we really doing here? On the other hand, when we think about issues like loss and damage and the need that developing countries have for finance, for mitigation, for adaptation, now for loss and damage, the only place to have that conversation is in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. It is the only game in town. And so the global South comes to these negotiations knowing that they're going to get steamrolled in so many ways, because these are spaces of geopolitics, right? And power is what it is in the global system. But they come every year because this is the one place that they can negotiate with some leverage to try to get some international support for climate action at home. And so, I've been to every COP for the last 10 years, and it's really, it's really easy to just think this is a really useless space, and it's a talk shop. Nothing's happening. That is true to a certain extent, and yet it is the one place where we can have conversations about finance, about loss and damage, and so on. And we need to make sure that we're there, even if we think we're there primarily for defensive reasons, right? To stop things from being even worse. That's a really important role to play. And there's a really important role to play for us in the US to hold our own government to account. And so I get it, but I really think we can't give up on these spaces. We have to understand what they're good for and what they're not good for, but we can't give them up.
All right, you all, thank you so much for a wonderful evening.